It's the library, and I'm with the Media Operations Department filming Authors Night. Our guest author today is Melina Sempill, who you may have heard of. She's gotten terrific publicity all over the city and in the newspapers, writing a book called Tree, which is a love letter to the Santa Monica Mountains. And your history, you're a former watershed coordinator for the Resource Conservation District of the Santa Monica Mountains. Now, what did that involve?
Well, when they were first looking for a watershed coordinator at the Resource Conservation District of the Santa Monica Mountains, they were certain that they wanted a biologist. But I looked at the job, and it involved working with city council members, people at cities and agencies and their staff and nonprofits and all these places on a community group where they were made decisions based on a facilitation process that was consensus-based. In other words, everybody had to agree to the outcome. So I called them up and said, you don't want a biologist. You want someone who can deal with lots of different kinds of people from all walks of life. So whatever the city of Calabasas or city of Malibu have to offer in terms of high-powered people, I'm your man. So they were a little surprised, but they brought me in and interviewed me and felt like I understood the issues emotionally and was prepared to bone up on the intellectual issues. And they said, we're going to try you for 6 weeks, and they kept me for 14 years.
That's a success story. Where did you grow up, and how did you become an environmentalist?
Well, I grew up in Topanga, California since the age of 7. And having been just before that in Virginia, which is a very lush ecosystem compared to the Mediterranean ecosystem of the Santa Monica Mountains, I was very surprised by how dry it was at first. So I had this process as a little girl of basically being startled by this very different place that I lived, and then gradually learning the names of the plants and the animals and completely falling in love with it. So that's how I came to be here.
So you didn't start off loving nature and all
I've
that.
always loved nature. What I'm saying is that nature in Virginia had snow, and it had really green trees. It had grass. If there wasn't snow, there was always grass. And so the way that our grass systems would be green and then they'd all go gold and look like they were dead and then they'd come back, that was something I had to learn to follow the flow of the seasons here and love this California version of reality. And it became my favorite place in the world.
Because people back east in the Middle West, they think we have no seasons, but we do.
We do, and what's interesting to me about our seasons is I joke we shouldn't have 4 seasons here, maybe we should have 3. Primarily because when we do have rainy years, of course we have dry years, but when we have rainy years and the rain really comes in around October, November, December, January, February, then it's over, that in effect is our spring. That's when all of our plants go bananas and start growing in. So if you're going to plant native plants in your garden, the time to do it is Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, Christmas, New Year's. Not in the spring, which is when people think that the spring, not when people think you should be gardening. If you put your plants in that are native plants and you put them in May or June, odds are it's going to be too hot for them to root well and they might die. So like learning to embrace our systems as they are, our seasons as they are, as opposed to what we think they are based on received knowledge is important.
And you presented this book at the LA Times Festival of Books this year?
I did. It was amazing. We had Thomas Kerwin as our facilitator, and he's a journalist who specializes in the environment. And he had actually written a story about spending 24 hours under an oak tree. So he completely fell for the book. So it was a pleasure having him as a facilitator. The other 2 authors were Beth Pratt Bergstrom, who is getting a lot of press for her book about living in the Santa Monica Mountains in Los Angeles County and finding out that there's all this wildness that's embedded in the urban systems. And then the other guy is named Darren Spees, and he wrote a book about the history of saving the redwoods over like 100 years duration. Absolutely fantastic. So it was an honor to hang out with them and have our conversation.
You've done a lot of speaking here. Weren't you doing something for Earth Day here in Calabasas?
I have done more Earth Days than I swear there are leaves on a tree. So I've always been, I've worked for the environment professionally for, a long time now. And so pretty much when people have an outreach event that's about, Earth Day or water conservation or native plants, I'm the go-to guy. So yeah, I've been involved with the city.
There's a wonderful article about you in the
in the Acorn.
Acorn. Sylvia did it?
Yeah, I was super honored by how much I felt like she got where I was coming from with the book.
She's an excellent
It
reporter.
was extraordinary. It was an extraordinary piece. I was very pleased.
So I enjoyed reading about you, and I was thrilled that you agreed to become our guest today. And is this your first book?
This is my first novel that I've published. Like most writers, I have a stack of manuscripts that I haven't published yet, so there's more coming, I hope. But this is the one.
First published
This
one.
is the first one that I chose to go public with it because I felt like it was the one that really encapsulates from my soul how I feel about the Santa Monica Mountains.
Did you? This is rather personal, but to write takes up so much of your professional time. Were you able to get financial support and help it being published? I know you have 3 children.
The first
hard
half
to
of
do.
the first half of the book, I wrote weekends and evenings and weird hours in the middle of the night when I woke up, and I also taught a class called Finish the Book, and the people that I was teaching the class paid for the class, and that helped fund, some time for writing. And the second half of the book, I was really stuck because a lot of times I think authors find there's a flow that happens when the idea first comes to you and it all comes out easily, and then you get stuck with the hard parts of the book. And I really needed time to do nothing but that. So I was friends with Ozzie Silna, who was a billionaire in Malibu, and he had donated to my work as a watershed coordinator. And so I sat him down over coffee and I said, Ozzie, I so appreciate your generosity, but I have to tell you that there's this other part of my life that I think is the most important thing I'll ever do with my time. And I've got to finish the book, and I need to be funded to do it so I can do nothing but the book. And he looked at me and he said, well, I don't actually like to read very much, but I totally appreciate the work that you do for the environment, and I trust you and I value. How much money do you need? And I said, well, Ozzie, I need $10,000. He goes, that's ridiculous. I'll give you 6. So I said, thank you very much, sir. And I took off, when my daughter was an infant, I took off 3 months from work and finished the rest of the book. So I was not allowed to say in Ozzie's lifetime that he was my donor because he felt that everybody and their dog would come up and ask him for money if they knew how nice he was. But since he left us this spring and is no longer in the realm of the living, I feel completely entitled to say he was a lovely guy and I owe him.
You owe a lot to him. What a wonderful, kind, and generous man.
He was a very fun guy, and he was a complete curmudgeon that half the community was always up in arms about.
Oh,
but
good.
he
must have been very interesting.
But he was my curmudgeon, okay? I loved him.
That was a lovely thing. Thank you for relating that to me. Now, this book, what gave you the idea to write about a tree?
Well, there's the official intellectual answer, which I will give you.
Tree. The book is
Yes.
just called Tree, and Tree is a character in the book.
Tree is the hero of the book, absolutely. Yes. And, intellectually, I've been very interested in research that I see happening in modern science where they're developing what appears to be pretty solid evidence that trees are communicating. Dr. Susan Simard developed this idea of the World Wood Web, and she says that there's fungal networks underneath the dirt where roots are transmitting extremely slowly messages back and forth to each other.
I've read that, I think, in the New York Times or one of the science magazines.
Right.
I forget where.
And then
it's
there's also theories that that trees are using electrical energy to talk back and forth. And then there's also pretty solid proof that many plants use, the things that we think makes plants smell good, that are like herbs that we want for whatever purpose, they're using these to talk back and forth to each other to say, hey, there's a predator coming through, there's a bee, flock of insects that's going to eat us or whatever. Stock up and make your leaves not taste good so they don't eat you. So you're using all these systems to talk. So it gave me the concept that making a book that's about the relationships of plants was viable. So that's the intellectual answer. Now the emotional answer is that when I was in college, I had this experience when I was at UC San Diego. I later transferred to UCLA, but I was really isolated, really lonely. I lay down in the grass on a Friday evening, just feeling like I wanted to die. And I heard the grass talking to me. And it was consoling me. And as soon as I talked back to the very first grass to talk to me, it felt like it told its friends that I was there, and they started talking.
Well, it's a living entity.
And it felt like this whole incredible lawn all noticed I was there at the same time. And I felt love. And so this book is for that field of grass.
What a wonderful thing to have experienced.
It takes some audacity to say that, because I feel like I may never get another serious job in the environment again if I concede that I'm talking to a field of grass. But what I'm finding from this experience is when I share this with people, like at the LA Times Book Festival, I had a teenager and her boyfriend come up to me in tears and say, my mom had that happen, you know? And when I worked with a Chumash scholar who's a professor, and she's also from the Chumash, and I was talking about, you know, this weird idea I had that plants talked to me, she said, oh, we think they talk to us all the time. That's not weird. So I'm realizing there's more of this sense of connectivity between plants and people than most people talk about in public. So I feel like the emotional reality of this book is resonating with people because it's in them already, but they haven't shared it.
Well, when I read that article, it coincided with my invitation to you, and I said, well, here's someone I can really talk to this about, because if I speak to someone, well, I understand your plants are communicating, talking to one another, but look at me like I was bonkers. But I got my first real plant about 2 weeks ago, because I had given up all my plants because I couldn't keep them alive. Mm-hmm. And I felt I will give them to my daughter or other people that have an affinity for these living entities, because I'm harming them by keeping them. And I talk to this plant now, and I've been talking to the outside bougainvilleas, and son of a gun if they haven't been thriving.
I totally buy it.
I think they can understand when you care about them as opposed to just caring for them. There's a difference. Just watering them, it ain't going to do it.
Absolutely.
You have to tell them, I want you to live, I want you to thrive, I'm going to feed you, I'm going to water you, I'm going to check on you.
Yes.
And touch them.
Yes. Yes, I'm sure that's true. And, you know, I'll share with you that if you choose native plants that are from our local ecosystems to put into your garden, they will take off and thrive after about a year of your care and do really well, because these are what we're created to be here, in effect, by evolution, or the divine, if you prefer.
Tree is the main character in the book.
Yes, Tree is the hero.
And what inspired this particular project? Was it your experience with the grass, or was it something else?
That was part of it. I've always loved trees especially, and I feel like, you know, every living being has an energy or presence that you can feel when you're out there in the world, and the bigger the tree, the more powerful their presence. And so to me, trees are the ultimate charismatic megafauna. They're very powerful. And certainly when you take someone who's never been there to like the redwoods or something, they're often like awestruck by that presence that's there. So I wanted to capture that to the best of my ability in the character of Tree. The other aspect of what drove me to write the book is I'm very interested in ecological history, by which I mean, if you look at how you have different cultures that are dominating an area over time, their cultural practices really drive the nature of what lives within the landscape. So if you look at Southern California, and you have, you know, early man, and then you have native groups like the Chumash on the Tongva, and then you go to the ranchero culture, and then you have, you know, the gold rush American culture and Angelino sort of, you know, 1980s Hollywood money culture. Each of those cultures I've mentioned had radical impacts on the ecosystems. So because Tree lives for 229 years in the center of this little valley in the middle of the Santa Monica Mountains, each of those cultures comes and goes, and the ecosystem changes radically around Tree through time. And as we go through Tree's life, we get to see the cost of coexisting with people for the rest of the landscape, if you will. And the simplest way of explaining this kind of unbelievable transition are two aspects that happened with the onset of the ranchero culture. When the Spanish came here, literally before they even came through our community, they had, you know, visited different parts of Southern California and the Southwest, and what happened is their horses had eaten grains in Europe, and so when the horses went to the bathroom or they had grains in their hooves or they spilled grains from what they were feeding them, those grasses took over and completely obliterated the native grass systems to the point where we're not totally sure what lived there before. We have an idea, but we don't know. So to get a sense of how powerful and how quick that changes, there's a whole science where they take adobe bricks from the oldest buildings in the Southwest, and they pick them apart and they look at the pollen and the seeds. And all of the pollen from the grass that they used in this adobe is from European plants, That's how fast it happened. Literally the oldest bricks we have. So that kind of like powerful like change is what part of what drove me to write the book, right? Another example of a really powerful quick change is when the Spanish were traveling, they wanted to have meat on the hoof because they're out in the outback with people they don't know if they're friendly or not, and they need to have food. So they brought packs of horses, donkeys, cows, and pigs with them, and they let the animals kind of be feral with them while they're traveling, and the pigs went pretty much loose and feral very quickly. Well, the thing about pigs is their favorite food in the world is acorns. Well, the Chumash, the backbone of their economy, was the acorn. It was far more healthy for you than wheat or rice or corn or any of those staples that we take for granted in Asian or European cultures, because it had more protein and it had more oil, so you could survive better with it being the center of your economy. The pigs ate every acorn there was. So when you look at how quickly people acquiesced to the missionization process, they were starving to death because of the pigs, right? So those kind of themes of inadvertent ecosystem forced transition is what is like behind the story of tree, if you will.
It's amazing. It really is. But the tree, I found, was able to interact not only with other species of nature, but with people.
So that's where the
book
gets into the. I think that Dr. Kevin Starr, the professor who taught California history, he talked about tree as being magical realism, which is a long tradition in Mexico and other countries in South America in fiction. And so whether a tree can actually have a conversation with a person, I leave it to others to judge. But in my emotional experience, I would say there is profound emotional connections that can happen with people and plants. And so the way that I built that into tree is that when tree is very small, tree is able to connect to another grass and then eventually some other trees. And then tree is sort of noticing, ants, people, a fox, other kinds of mammals and beings and birds, and is aware of them, but doesn't know how to connect to them. And so one character undergoes, catastrophic grief, and that's a human being. And when that human being is just at her absolute most horrible point of her life, she's sort of cracked open with grief. Tree is able to access this person, and she's able to access tree. And that interconnection is the soul of the book.
It was beautifully done.
Thank you.
Now, you mentioned truffles in the book, which is fungi, assisted in in the plant-to-plant communication. How was that?
I wouldn't state categorically that it's truffles. That's the primary source of that interplant communication. There are numerous fungal species, and I think they are used collectively with this process of root-to-root communication. There are certainly some fungi that are devastating to oak trees. And so what happens when we have a tree in our backyards, that's the California live oak, or at our businesses, and we have grass that we plant right up to it and we're watering the grass to keep it healthy, it's more water than the oak tree's system is designed to take. Oak trees are designed, our California native oaks, not European oaks, are designed to receive water in the winter. So when we water them in the summer, in the heat, when they're not designed for that, the fungal does an overgrowth thing, and it'll essentially rot out your tree, and it'll kill it in 5 to 10 years time. So when they give people best practices for having a California live oak in their backyard, they tell you to leave an area that's the size of the crown, or maybe a little bigger, that's just stuff with nothing underneath it. So
what's sad about trees, so I don't forget this thought, I was reading somewhere that the number of trees in the United States is dwindling.
It's very painful.
Very, very painful, because people are, well, first of all, you lose trees. Trees have finite life spans, which was hard for me to accept when I lost a couple of trees. And the experts in the landscaping said, well, they've lived for this long, which is a lifespan for the tree. Mm-hmm. I thought they lived forever.
Well, there are trees that live to be like 1,500 years old, or these unbelievably long lifetimes that are almost emotionally incomprehensible to us, right? They're so long.
But others do not. And people are cutting down their trees and getting rid of their trees, not relocating, to make room for pools, to give more sun in their yard, for all these reasons that they're not necessary.
Well, you know, the book forward was written by Andy Lipkiss, who is the founder of Tree People, and his nonprofit, which has, I don't know, 25,000 members or something like that. It's very large in Los Angeles County. They're devoted to helping people find ways to have trees in the urban ecosystem that provide benefits for us and that we provide for them, sort of back and forth, if you will. And you know, there is research showing that we're losing trees at a terrible rate in LA County, in part because there's some infestations of insects, in part because of the drought, and also because people are making landscaping choices that are unfortunate. And
we need trees.
And when we talk about, you know, water conservation, one of the things that Andy talks about at Tree People is if you let grass die or little plants die, those plants are much easier to regenerate and bring back if you have. But if you let a tree die, a tree takes 10, 20, 50, 100 years to get to its full size. So if you're going to make a choice with your landscape, hold on to your trees. Let everything else, like, you know, meet its maker if you have to do so for water conservation. But try to keep your trees going, and then you have the ability to re-garden as we have more access to water. So.
Well, your tree in the book was a very endearing character. I mean, you had to like tree. The philosophy of tree was beautiful, and the habits of tree. It's too bad that some people can't become closer to a tree. I mean, I grew up with a tree down the block, and I spent half of my time in climbing that tree and sitting in it most of the day. And it was a wonderful, comforting experience. And trees can give you that in your life.
Yes. Absolutely.
The theme of the book is growth and death also.
Yes. Yes, I felt very strongly that because tree has a much longer lifespan than certainly human beings have and than most plants have, tree has to come to terms with mortality of those that, you know, plants and people and other trees that tree loves, because they come and they go relatively quickly compared to a California live oak. One of the things that no one has caught yet, but I think it's rather poignant, is California live oaks can easily live to be 500 or 600 years old. So the lifespan that this tree has, it's kind of like, you know, Romeo and Juliet, where it's dying like a teenager.
The tree saw friends go.
But yes, so the tree has to acquiesce to the process of loving and letting go that is mortality. And to me, finding a way to cherish that the other beings who you've loved and yet not be crushed by that grief, that's what makes it possible to live a full life.
I mean, there's a feeling from that tree. I mean, you knew how tree felt.
Good. I'm glad you feel that way.
It was like you would not feel surprised if it was a human protagonist or a human character. But to feel a commonality and empathy with a tree is unusual. But you managed to convey that.
Well, one of the things I tried to work on was to help people understand the idea of thinking that your space in the world is the center of the universe. For tree, this little valley is the whole world.
Yes.
Tree's never going to leave that valley, and that's the most important, beautiful, powerful place in the world. And tree's ability to imagine space beyond that specific valley is very limited, right? So sometimes there's something like a forest fire where the tree can hear the sound of, you know, bad things happening far off. And for the tree to try to project what that might be is almost impossible. So there's certain differences of experience that the tree has that are totally different from us. One of which is so much of human existence is based upon our chronic need to find and pair off with someone we love. Now, whether that's traditional romantic love or gay or lesbian love, it still involves two people meeting and connecting soul to soul. But for a plant, for most plants, they are male and not all plants. Some plants are male, some plants are female, but most plants are male and female simultaneously. And so their process of being receptive to the male coming in and letting their own male energy go out while simultaneously being female so that they can create acorns or nuts or whatever it is a totally different emotional reality than we have. So I hope that this book helps people imagine what it's like to be a plant where you have deep feelings, but they're not necessarily romantic love in the sense that we think of it as. It's plenty romantic from trees' point of view, but it's not our romantic, it's trees' romantic.
I'm curious, as I was when I was reading the book, is tree an actual tree that you have in mind?
Tree is based on every tree I've ever loved my whole life, so there's not a specific tree.
And now I can understand why it lives in Topanga.
Yes.
Because you lived in Topanga.
I did.
And you're very close with a knowledge about the Chumash culture. They teach us so much. What in particular do you think we can learn a lot about from the Chumash?
I spent some time at Wishchoyo, and I worked with a Chumash scholar who has asked to remain anonymous, primarily because she has her own novel coming out, and her agent has said that she doesn't want her name connected to other projects that might have any overflow. But probably my favorite moment in working with her is there's a section in the book where I described one of the skirts that the girl's wearing, and I had done research and looked at a museum description of a skirt and put down all the details of what the skirt was made out of. And she wrote on the side in red ink, "I love the description of the skirt. It's completely correct, except it sounds like this, like a soft whisper, not like you just described." And so what I realized is she's still wearing that skirt to special events, that kind of exact skirt. So the wonderful thing that I got out of doing this project was realizing that Chumash culture, as we teach it in California public schools, is taught as in the olden days we have the Chumash. There is no olden days. They're alive. They're here, and they're still celebrating their culture. They've taken their language, which was totally extirpated. It was extinct by 1960s. And they have worked with scholars and gotten dictionaries, and they are teaching their children to speak Chumash. They do prayers and songs in Chumash. They are reviving their culture. It's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. And they believe that if they can bring back the language with the stories, with the culture, that their ecosystem knowledge that was built into their culture will be shared and spread with the world. So they really welcome people to come and learn about their culture because they think that they can save us. And I'm very intrigued by how if you go to Hawaii, they talk about the aloha spirit or certain cultural values that you can only define with a specific Hawaiian word. I mean, you can't say that in any other way except aloha, but everybody knows what you mean. So I'm fascinated and excited about what they're doing with this. So,
you posed a question when we were communicating on the internet, why there's so little fiction about environment. Other than, and I try to say, well, there must be a lot of fiction. Well, what Annie Prohl has written, but that's nonfiction. The only fiction author I've found is Dr. Seuss in the Lorax, who wrote fiction. Did a fiction book about the environment. And then I posed it to several readers. Have you ever read a book about the environment that was fiction? If not, why not? And they say, well, it's just like real, it's so real that anything about the environment other than science fiction
I would say
be
that's not
nonfiction.
what's going on, in my opinion. In my opinion, what I think is happening is editors have ideas and publishers have ideas, mainstream publishers and editors, about what they think is going to sell, right? So they think that if you write a book for teenagers about a sexy vampire, that's a good bet. If you write a book about the environment, they're like, what? They don't get it. They understand historical romance as a genre. They understand mysteries as a genre. They don't see the environment as a genre. So there's some really outstanding books like Ecotopia, which was written about a fictional California state that was all green and fun and, pagan wild. Or there's the Monkey Wrench Gang that were standout important environmental books when they came out, but they are standalone almost. They don't have a whole cadre of brothers and sisters on the shelf. So one of my goals with this book is to be out there as an environmental piece of fiction and help people think about, hey, this is a genre that's worth writing about. Because, of course, the role of fiction when you're dealing with ideas, is to give people creative space to think about a different way of living than they customarily do. And in this case, I'm saying, not only are all men brothers, all plants and all animals are, and, open the tent bigger, come outside.
This book is part of the Change the World books.
Yes.
Is that a theme, and many books are included in a series? What is the Change the World books?
I will tell you what Change the World books is. About 3 years ago, I pulled together what I hoped would be a board of directors for a company I wanted to grow. That would be a publishing house. And they were basically some of the smartest, most exciting, most successful people I knew in the Santa Monica Mountains. We met up at Trust Ranch in Topanga Canyon, which is owned by Martin Smith and Sue Smith. And we each talked about, if we had a publishing house, what would it be like? And so Martin, who's a serial entrepreneur, a really fun guy, he said, after everyone had done talking, me included, said, Melina, because what you really want, you're not dreaming big enough. What you want is to change the world. And so that's where the genesis of the name came, is Change the World Books. And so our idea, the 12 of us at that time, is that we wanted to start a publishing house, and we wanted to create books that would allow people to have new ways of thinking about problems and solutions. I'm very interested in solutions, not just problems. And I feel like so much of journalism is focusing on, oh my goodness, look at this collapse and disaster. And I'm like, okay, let's call in the engineers. What do we do? That's my modus operandi. So what I found with my pack of 12 is they were all in love with the idea, but there weren't the financial resources, and there wasn't the time base with everybody to participate. So it kind of turned into my company. And I do expect to circle back to in each one of them and say, okay, what have you got that you want to publish, and let's work on it together. One of the ideas that came out of in that evening that I'm excited about is books that are Change the World books, where we'll address a specific issue, like, say, example, education, and we'll find people who have found amazing solutions in all different walks of life throughout the country or the world, and give them a venue to talk about their solutions that worked for them in their community in one book. And then that can be something that people can use in universities or in city councils or whatever as a jumping off point to how can we get the world we want? Because we create the world that we want by how we work together. And I feel very often that people feel overwhelmed by the national political process. But if you keep it small and you work with your city councils and you work in your own state, you can do amazing things. So that's why we based the book in California, because we know in California we're still living the dream.
So there's more books and more
Absolutely.
issues coming up in your life.
They're not all going to be by me, and there are plenty more by me, but they'll be by other people. And it comes down to a question of capital, and do I have enough capital to implement everything we want? And it depends on how many copies of this book I sell, doesn't it?
Is this your first novel, your debut novel?
This is my debut novel. I have plenty of other manuscripts that are awaiting their turn in the sunshine. But you talked about your emotional relationship with Tree. I have a passionate relationship with Tree. Tree's like my best friend. I had to get Tree out first.
What age group are you targeting? Because I know as an adult I loved it, but I thought it would be very appropriate for middle school and high schoolers.
I believe it would be fantastic for high school and probably middle school. I have an 8-year-old child who's very precocious, very bright. She's reading all sorts of grown-up books. And we got halfway through it, and she said, Mommy, it's so sad. Can I wait?
It is sad.
She goes,
it's real life.
She said, can I wait till I'm a teenager to find out what happens next? So I think that's the answer of, it's a little too tough for little guys. It's a book for adults, and it's a book for teenagers who are thinking and feeling like adults. And I believe we typically underestimate the intellectual firepower of your average teenager. So I welcome any teenagers who want to read this book to sign up and jump in.
Now, it's an honor for our library to be carrying this book. Where else can somebody get it if they want it for their library?
Well, my first choice if they're shopping is to go to Diesel Bookstore in Brentwood, because I believe in supporting, small local businesses, and they have been very good to me. Of course, I'm on Amazon and Alibris and Barnes & Noble online as well.
But you're moving away from Calabasas, and we will miss you.
It's very bittersweet.
I hope that you'll come back.
It's a bittersweet thing, but I am moving to Sacramento, so anybody who wants to visit me in Sacramento, and I'm available, and I'm looking forward to working with the people that are running our government up there who are doing great work.
Would you leave our session with words from the book that are very, very meaningful and memorable, and I'd like the audience to hear it. It's far better than anything I could say.
That was the underlying melody in every thought and sensation, via every rock and plant and animal and sky and star, inside the water, from the dirt, through the light. And he found the exact words to speak just before Enzo fell into sleep. Tree told Enzo, "Only love lasts."
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, audience, for being with us this afternoon for Author's Night.